So the last couple things we need to go over real quick is while we're in the future going to be using referential model generation or geometry generation, we also need to do referential geometry execution, I guess would be the term for it. But what that means essentially is that while we can click on a geometry using object snaps in order to create it in place, if we don't have a second input or a second object snap to snap to when we're creating it, then we have to input that information in reference to its new base point. I'll show you what that means. So we have a cube here. It sits at the origin 0, 0. I want to create another cube that sits at its second point, 24, 24. And then I want to make it the same size, which is 24 by 24 and 24 tall. So there's a difference here. With object snap on, now we know when I start the command, I don't have to type in 24, 24. I can click it, I can click on the other side, and then the confusing part is when you type in 24, 24, it doesn't do anything. So why is that? Can anybody guess?
Because it's at the same point. Same point.
Right, exactly. Because it's trying to place the opposite side of the base of this box in exactly the same point as its own origin. So it's non-existent. So what we have to do is tell it to go 24 feet by 24 feet from the first point. And the way that that's done is just by typing in at.
Like AutoCAD.
Yes, just like AutoCAD. So for those of you who are AutoCAD users, it's the same thing. At 24, 24. And it'll jump out the other way from its original position. And then the last part of the command, 24 high, is the same. Just 24 and enter.
So the at is like additional?
So that's a good way of asking that question. Just to give you guys some insight to the way that I tend to learn best in this software, when I'm thinking of these sentences, I think of them as complete, almost grammatically correct sentences as I'm thinking about the way that they operate. So for instance, when I see at 24 by 24, I usually say at this origin, move 24 by 24. That's kind of just the way I try to visualize how they're working. You'll see that with Boolean functions, it really comes into play. Yes?
Could you have just typed in 48, 48?
Yes, you could. Yeah, that's a good question. So you could. I'll go here and I'll say 48, 48. And it gives me the same thing, 24 high. The reason I'm teaching you at is because once you have an actual architectural model that's got features everywhere and little tiny things that are paired up with really big things, you're going to have to do a lot of math in order to figure out exactly where it sits in 3 dimensions. Not to mention, most architectural projects or models are not built exactly on the origin. So not only would you have to figure out where that is referential to this point, but if I have a model that's built all the way out here, where is that point's origin to the file origin? You know, so that's why it's important, because now I've got this model that sits out in space and I need to use referential data input. Okay. So, there was one other thing that I wanted to teach you, and now it's slipping my mind, but it'll come back in as we progress, I'm sure. So,
So when you're doing
yes.
the at, because you said you would read it as at this origin with 24, 24. The origin can be anywhere. It's not necessarily 0, 0, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So, for instance, if I wanted to draw a line, let me just do the same thing. Activate a line command. and I just put it out in space. I don't even have to anchor it on existing geometry. It doesn't matter where it is in space. I just click somewhere. And I know that I want this thing to go 5 feet in the x direction, 5 feet in the y direction, and 10 feet in the z direction. I say at 5 feet, comma, did I say 5, 5, 10? 5 feet, 10 feet. So you can't really tell right now, but if you look at it in elevation, I happen to have placed it in a really odd location, it seems. But if I was to measure exactly how far it went in the x direction in the top view and the y direction above, let's actually measure that. So I'll turn project on. I'll explain project in just a second, but you click here and you can pull that down 5 feet, even though in 3 dimensions it's totally skew, right? So it doesn't matter where it's anchored. It's entirely referential to that first point that you clicked. Good question. Okay, so another thing that just came up, some of you, I think I introduced this to you last class, but it was just very high level and I didn't actually state what happened. But I no longer have geometry in the top view because I started, moving things around and deleting things and, spreading them apart. If I want to recover a particular geometry in the top view, you can use zoom select. And the hotkey for that is ZS. So I have no idea where my geometry is in the top view, but I see it in perspective. I click it, and I type in ZS. Oh, sorry. Activate the top view. So you need to click on the top view tab, then say ZS, 1ZS, and it pops up. It'll zoom to the selected geometry. Okay, so that's just a recovery thing for any of you guys, if any of you guys find yourselves lost in your model while we're moving through. Okay, so let's begin to cut this thing up, right? It's the exciting part. That's what you're all here for. Let's take a look at our PDF. We're going to do one cut. Here we are. And we want the front view, that's the back. Well, yeah, let's start at the top view actually. So we're going to model something in the top view. And we're going to have a quick conversation about workflow because there are many, many ways that you can generate geometry. And then we need to also think about what I would call negative geometry. Stuff that is only there as a means to get to a different result, and it's not meant to be permanent. So if I want to make a big cut, a big gash in the side of the model here, we're going to start with one of these really big ones because they're kind of easy. I need to generate another form, place it on my cube, and then subtract it from that cube. But I remember what it was I wanted to show you before we moved on to this now. In order to visualize what's happening, you need to actually kind of see the surfaces. It'll be far easier for you if you can actually see the surfaces rather than just see lines that are being generated by cuts. So let's talk real quick about display, and then I'll cut the videos, make sure you're all displayed correctly, and then we'll move on to actual model manipulation. So you have, under the Standard tab, a couple of display options at your disposal, and they're actually right here. These 3 display options actually have 2 functions in each one, and hover over the icon real quick. It'll disappear, I think, in just a sec, but as I keep going back onto it, you'll see that there's a little icon that looks like a mouse, and it's got a black button on the left side and a black button on the right side. That means that when I click left click on that button, it's going to shade one viewport, versus right clicking on that button, it shades all viewports. So perspective is activated. I click shade, and you see it shades it. And now If I do the same thing, even with perspective still active, I right click it and it shades all viewports. So that's how those little tags that are popping up really operate. It gives you options. Even when, okay, yeah. So at the same time, if you see that it's got a little gray triangle, I almost called it an arrow, but I can't quite qualify that as an arrow. But a little gray triangle in the bottom right corner of the icon, that means that it has other options that you can pick from. So if you hover over the bottom right corner, it tells you that you can open up that menu and look at it in different ways. So any of these viewports, view styles, visibility styles, will actually have multiple options. So you can set them all, or you can only set one. So wireframe, the one in the top left corner, is what we were working on. I don't know why that disappeared. But shaded viewport is what we usually work in, or at least I usually work in. So you'll find that I spend a lot of time in shaded viewport because you get wireframe and you get to see the surfaces. Versus this display, which is confusing because you can't see any of the line work. There we go. Okay, I am going to pause the video here, and it's a little after 8, so I'm probably going to give you guys a 7-minute break. So are there any questions right now? Yes?
How would you cancel the shade?
What's that?
How would you cancel it?
Cancel it? I feel like you could just, yeah. Right click. Well, you can go back to wireframe viewport, but I think I recall there being a hotkey to just take it off and go back to wireframe, but I forget. Yeah, so you would just go back to wireframe. Any other questions? Okay, let's take a 7-minute break, so we'll get going again at 8:15.